It was a morning like any other. The sky above Manhattan stretched out in a perfect blue, the kind of clarity that made the city feel endless, untouchable. Commuters rushed to work, coffee cups in hand, shoes pounding sidewalks, elevators climbing toward meetings, emails and deadlines. But in the silence above, aboard 4 hijacked planes, death had already taken its seat. Within moments, the world would change. And for those who lived through it, time would never feel linear again. At 8:46 a.m., a Boeing 767 came screaming through the sky and slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. What people thought was an accident, maybe a small plane, a malfunction, something explainable, was only the beginning. 17 minutes later, another plane hit the South Tower. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't confusion. It was war. Not on a battlefield, but in the heart of America's financial capital, in broad daylight, live on television screens watched by millions. At 9:37 a.m., another plane tore into the Pentagon, punching through the core of the U.S. military. And at 10:03 a.m., the final hijacked plane, destined for more destruction, crashed in a Pennsylvania field, brought down by the unbreakable will of passengers who refused to die without a fight. Nearly 3,000 lives were extinguished in the span of just 102 minutes. And among the twisted steel, shattered glass and thick clouds of smoke, the world witnessed a level of carnage that hadn't touched American soil in generations. It was chaos. It was collapse. It was the sound of sirens, of people leaping from flaming towers, of buildings groaning as they gave way to gravity, of families screaming into cell phones for answers that never came. First responders ran toward death. Hundreds died doing so. Civilians tried to escape floors that had already become tombs. And the streets below turned into a dust-choked battlefield of fear and disbelief. But as the last of the towers fell and the silence settled over the debris like a shroud, the United States did what it always does. It rose up. The FBI launched the largest investigation in its history, codename PENTTBOM. More than 4,000 agents, 55 field offices, thousands of interviews across dozens of countries. It wasn't just a manhunt, it was an all-out war for answers. And at the heart of it all were 19 names, 19 hijackers trained by Al-Qaeda, each with a one-way ticket and a will to kill. Mohammed Atta, Ziad Jarrah, Hani Hanjour, Marwan al-Shehi. The names were unfamiliar then. Now they echo with infamy. They entered the country legally, some trained at American flight schools. They lived in apartment complexes, shopped at grocery stores, shared coffee with neighbors. But their mission was never life. It was martyrdom. Their leader, Osama bin Laden, had spent years building a machine of terror. And on September 11, 2001, that machine roared to life in the skies above America. The evidence came in fast, and it came in fire. Surveillance tapes, cell phone records, DNA from crash sites, black box data, security footage from airports, witness statements from around the globe. The PENTTBOM investigation cracked open the reality of Al-Qaeda's global reach. From Florida to Hamburg, from Pakistan to Yemen, the puzzle pieces fell into place. And what they revealed was chilling. 9/11 had been years in the making. Flight 11, Flight 175, Flight 77, Flight 93. Each one hijacked with ruthless precision. Box cutters as weapons, cockpit doors forced open, flight attendants stabbed, pilots executed, passengers huddled in terror, unaware their planes had become guided missiles. In the case of Flight 93, the passengers didn't sit back, they fought. Their final words to loved ones, etched into history, spoke of courage so immense it forced a burning jetliner out of the sky before it could claim even more lives. At Ground Zero, rescue teams clawed through rubble for weeks. They weren't just looking for survivors, they were looking for answers. Every shard of plane, every passport, every trace of DNA. Over 150,000 pieces of evidence were collected, including a hijacker's passport somehow ejected from the flames and found blocks away. Forensics teams worked around the clock, identifying remains, reconstructing impact trajectories, decoding just how the Twin Towers, built to withstand earthquakes and storms, collapsed in a symphony of dust and death. The Pentagon became a smoking crater of papers and bodies, the flames licking at one of the most secure buildings on Earth. And in Pennsylvania, farmers and firefighters stood in silent disbelief as they approached a scar in the earth, where Flight 93 ended its defiant arc. This wasn't just a national tragedy, it was a global awakening. Borders tightened, airports transformed, surveillance expanded. The United States launched a new kind of war, one that didn't target countries, but ideologies. And at the center of it all was a ghost. A man hiding in mountains, celebrated by radicals, hunted by everyone else. Osama bin Laden. But 9/11 wasn't just about geopolitics or terrorism. It was about people, about those who never got to say goodbye. About those who left home that morning expecting nothing more than a normal Tuesday. About the firefighters, the police, the nurses, the strangers who ran into burning buildings to save lives and never walked out. It was about the children left fatherless, the parents who buried their babies, the spouses who fell asleep to empty pillows. And it was about the questions that still linger even decades later. What more could have been done? How did a plot of such magnitude slip through the cracks? Who failed and who paid the price? Were the warnings ignored? Was the intelligence too scattered? Was the response enough? In the days and weeks that followed, the world stood with America. Candlelight vigils in Paris, silent mourning in Tokyo, blood drives in London. And at home, a unity surged across a divided country. Flags flew, hands reached out, names were read aloud in the cold morning air, and every September, bells still ring at the same times those planes struck. But even as the scars fade from buildings and bodies, the psychological wound of that day remains. The fear, the confusion, the feeling that the ground beneath us could never again be truly solid. As the dust settled across lower Manhattan and the Pentagon's charred walls cooled, a different kind of battle began. One fought not with weapons, but with evidence, data, and relentless pursuit. It was the largest criminal investigation in American history, and it had one goal: identify every player involved, expose the entire network, and make sure nothing like this would ever happen again. The FBI named it PENTTBOM, short for Pentagon Twin Towers bombing, and what followed was an investigation so vast, so global, it rewrote the playbook on counterterrorism. The first breakthrough came quickly. Within 24 hours, authorities released the names and photos of the 19 hijackers. They weren't shadows anymore. They were real men with real pasts, flight school transcripts, visa applications, rental car receipts, credit card trails. And those trails led everywhere. From a gym in Florida where Muhammad Atta trained, to motel rooms in New Jersey, to flight simulators in Minnesota where instructors had once raised alarms but were dismissed. Suddenly, the timeline was alive. The warnings were documented. The dots, in hindsight, were there, but no one had connected them in time. Thousands of agents were mobilized. Data poured in from over 30 countries. Phone records, wire transfers, ATM footage, airplane manifests and emails. Everything was now evidence. Over 150,000 pieces of material were collected and logged. The Bureau interviewed more than 160,000 people. Entire teams were dispatched to Pakistan, Germany, Saudi Arabia. Every apartment the hijackers had touched was ripped apart, reconstructed, analyzed. Every minute of their journey to that day was tracked. Hotel stays, training camps, mosque visits, even fast food receipts. The goal was simple: understand how the plot came together and who else might still be out there. And yet, for all the answers uncovered, more questions flooded in. The world learned the name Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, KSM, the mastermind behind the attacks. His planning dated back to the mid-1990s, inspired by an earlier failed plan to crash planes into US landmarks. He had been the architect, the blueprint maker, the man who brought bin Laden's vision to life. But KSM wasn't caught until 2003, found in Pakistan, dragged out of a safe house in the dead of night. Since then, he's remained in US custody, his trial endlessly delayed. Over 2 decades later, there's still no final verdict, no courtroom justice, only a story paused in legal limbo. The one man who did stand trial was Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker. He was already in custody before the attacks, arrested after raising suspicions at a Minnesota flight school. He pled guilty in 2005 to conspiracy charges and was sentenced to life without parole. But even in court, his testimony only added fog. He claimed knowledge of a broader network, then recanted. He named names, then denied them. He fueled the fire of conspiracy theorists who were already asking questions the official reports didn't fully answer. Because even as the FBI traced every dollar and every footstep, something else had begun to rise, a different kind of investigation. One not led by law enforcement, but by the public, by skeptics, by those who looked at the scale of devastation and asked, could it really have been just 19 men? Could 2 planes really bring down those towers so cleanly? What about Building 7, which fell without being hit? What about the hole in the Pentagon? Was it truly made by a plane? The questions became louder. Books were published, forums exploded, and then came the documentaries. In 2005, Loose Change, a low-budget internet film, swept through online spaces like wildfire, proposing that the US government had let the attacks happen. Or worse, planned them. They pointed to anomalies in the collapse footage, alleged military stand-down orders, financial transactions that defied logic, missing black boxes, and government officials who appeared too calm, too fast with answers. To the families of victims, these claims felt like an insult. To the doubters, they were pieces of a larger puzzle being hidden in plain sight. The official response came in 2004, the 9/11 Commission report. It was 585 pages long. It confirmed that Al-Qaeda was solely responsible. That intelligence failures, bureaucratic silos, and missed warnings allowed the attack to unfold. But for some, the answers weren't enough. They pointed to the redacted pages, the missing timelines, the refusal to hold certain figures accountable. And the deeper they looked, the more they saw a system too complex to grasp and too broken to fix. Meanwhile, America changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Patriot Act gave unprecedented powers to intelligence agencies. Surveillance expanded, phone calls were tapped, emails flagged, airports became fortresses with every belt removed, every liquid scrutinized, every passenger a potential threat. The Department of Homeland Security was born, and with it came a new era of domestic counterterrorism. But it came at a cost. Civil liberties were challenged, communities were profiled, and fear became a permanent fixture of American life. And then came the wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, thousands of American soldiers sent to foreign sands. The Taliban was toppled and Al-Qaeda scattered. But Iraq, a war built on intelligence claims that later proved false, opened a new chapter of blood and confusion. Weapons of mass destruction were never found. Bin Laden was nowhere near Baghdad, and the death toll kept climbing, military, civilian, innocent. Years later, in 2011, the world watched as President Obama walked to a podium and said the words, "Osama bin Laden is dead," killed in a nighttime raid in Abbottabad, Pakistan. It was closure, but it wasn't justice. His death brought no end to the terror. Al-Qaeda fractured, but other threats rose. ISIS, lone wolves, sleeper cells. The enemy had changed its face, but not its intent. And what of the health toll, of the firefighters who spent weeks breathing in toxic dust, only to develop cancer years later? of the residents displaced, the families bankrupted, the minds broken by trauma that never got to heal. Over 70,000 first responders and survivors have suffered chronic illnesses linked to that day. Many have died, and they didn't die in flames or collapse. They died in silence, in hospital beds, years after the headlines had moved on. But perhaps the most haunting legacy of 9/11 is not the attack itself. It is the silence between the questions, the lingering doubt, the things we still don't know, the classified files, the missed connections, the names never released, the motives never fully explained, the way a Tuesday morning turned into a global trauma, and how, even now, we're still unpacking what that really means. 24 years later, memorials stand where towers once touched the sky. Pools of reflection mark the footprints of the dead. Names are etched in stone. Tourists walk slowly, whispering. Children born after 2001 learn about it through videos and books. But for those who lived it, the memory isn't history. It's a scar. The Freedom Tower now rises where rubble once smoked. It's tall, defiant, unbroken. But underneath, the wound remains. In the city's breath, in the stories told over dinner tables, in the eyes of every firefighter who survived, in the paused silence every year at 8:46 a.m. September 11th wasn't just a terrorist attack. It was a dividing line, a moment that split the timeline of an entire civilization into before and after. And what came after was fear, war, strength, doubt, patriotism, pain, questions, resolve. And somewhere out there, in the silence of classified archives, in the testimony of men waiting for trials that may never come, in the hearts of millions still healing, there is still a need for truth. The kind of truth that doesn't come from a commission report or a headline. The kind that comes when a nation truly asks itself, what happened, why, and what must we do to make sure the sky never falls again?